Hello everyone, welcome to the Modio Skills Session on Successful Strategies for Cognos Deployments Across Environments. This is Holly Rice from the Modio Marketing Team, and today Edwin Van Megason and Roger Moore will discuss the limitations that many of you face with deploying BI assets into production environments. Roger will be demonstrating the deployment method that many of our customers have implemented to successfully save time and money. Before they get started, let's take care of a few housekeeping items. The menu at the bottom of your screen is where you control the webinar widgets. Take a look at those and familiarize yourself with them. If you have any sort of technical difficulties, the yellow icon with the question mark is where you can get immediate help. The audio is controlled through your speakers and is the red media widget. The purple Q&A icon is where you can submit your questions during the webinar. We will handle those after Roger's presentation. The green icon on the far right is a very short survey that we would appreciate you submitting towards the end of the presentation. This is just so we can create content that is useful for you. And of course, we are recording, so you can have access to that later and share it with your colleagues. We are also live tweeting today's broadcast. So if you click on the Twitter widget, you can access your Twitter account and join the conversation. We will be using the Modio Skills hashtag, and our tweeters are at Modio_Inc. and at Cognos Ninja. Now I will pass the mic to Edwin.
So thank you, Holly. So let's go over the agenda for today. Well, you all know that the current way of deployment that you do in IBM Cognos come with some risk. But that's not the only thing, right? It's labor intensive, and the way of working has some embedded issues as well. So we will show you today how we have helped hundreds of customers to do a smarter deployment. And third, how to implement this, how to get this fast up and running for you. And last, we will have some time for questions, and please fill in the survey at the end of this webinar. Okay, so let's get started. So if we look at the current way of people doing deployments, the export-import method is delivered by IBM Cognos out of the box. And that has caused many customers to look for better ways. They started to code, make some code themselves. They started with copy and pasting, and they also introduced some deployment folders and then copy it over to another environment. But all these methodologies doesn't really solve their problem. Building code yourself in the SDK or in Java, well, that you have to maintain for each version of Cognos. Copy pasting XML is just not doable if you have a large release. And release folders can cause other things like breaking links. So I'm quite interested how you do it today, so I will start a poll question and let us know what your method is of deployment. I think by now everybody has filled it in, so let's take a look at the results. Okay, copy reports into a deployment folder and export import to the target environment. That's what 70% of the people are doing. So that's very good because that's what we're going to discuss today and how we are going to do that. Copy pasting specs, that's what we do. Export folders where reports belong. Okay, that's generally a way of working. I see that nobody's using MotioCI right now or build some code themselves. Okay, very interesting. So let's have a discussion here. So why are these methods causing problems? Well, First of all, it's very complex. It's inefficient. And I have seen organizations having crazy processes in place and then start projects to simplify these crazy processes, just because it takes too much time and the cycle time is too long. And that comes with money as well. It's too expensive to do it this way, so people don't have that many releases. It's risky as well because you don't have a safety net. And what is your backup? What happens if you have to roll back? And what will end users think about this way of working? It doesn't sound as a very solid way of working. Okay. And then last, it's not very flexible. If you want to decentralize, if you want to schedule releases at night, if you want to verify if it works in production before you're actually committing the deployment, well, that's not possible in native Cognos. So in my prior job, I was a BI project manager, and this was always one of the most frustrating aspects of BI, getting releases into production. Okay, so we will look at the MotioCI methodology and how we do that. We will show you that we can create an efficient process, which is just a one-click deployment, and that we can be flexible and agile and reduce the cycle time by days or even weeks. And we will eliminate the risk associated with it. So how did other people do this? So first, IBM. So why IBM on this slide? Well, IBM has the largest Cognos implementation in the world. A centralized deployment doesn't work if you have 4,000 developers and 5,000 testers working around the globe. So they have purchased MotioCI to use this internally. And then look at Jabil. Jabil presented last Insight that they were able to improve the time to market from months to weeks. But also Eneco, they use MotioCI for over 8 years now and saving 500 hours per year. Well, a quick math told me that's about 4,000 hours to date. And that's a lot of hours. And then finally, Davida. So Davida out there in Denver, they had only one man doing the deployments. Well, that's risky, right? And they wanted to change that. Okay. So you're here today to learn about other ways of deployment. So what I would like to know here is what your top 3 drivers are to improve this development and release process. So if you could pick 3, then we can see what the audience is looking for. So I'll give you a few seconds here. All right, I think that everybody will be done by now, unless you're typing your 256 characters. Okay, guys, let's take a look. So what do we see here? Let me take a look at all the answers. Okay, so that's interesting. So simplifying the release process, and I can imagine that because it's very complex, and that comes with increasing the quality of a deployment. Don't deliver something to production that's broken or is not working fine. So I can see that, yes, and reduce the risk of user disruptions. Yes, that's very important, and the management of release process as well. Okay, so it's less about saving money like Eneco did, or empower users with self-service deployment. Okay, so that's very good. Let me hand over now to Roger Moore, and he will demonstrate you how this can be done with MotioCI.
Okay. So I'm going to walk through a couple of different scenarios with you. The first thing that I want to go through is I want to show doing an export import in Cognos. Let me go ahead and share my screen before I get too far into this discussion. So I've shared my screen now, and you all should be looking at. I've loaded Cognos 11, and I'm going to walk through a couple of different deployment scenarios with Cognos 11 and MotioCI. For those of you that are still using Cognos 10, everything that I show today is equally applicable. It's essentially the exact same process, whether you're doing deployments from Cognos or MotioCI. So it should be the same version or the same process exactly. And I'll walk you through that. I'm glad, I saw the survey results, and I'm glad to see, we set up this presentation, and the scenario that I'm going to walk through is what I've seen at a lot of customer sites where they're doing deployments and they're using export import, and they're going, and I'm going to show, and they use like a folder to copy things into for the particular release. They do import export, and and you guys alluded to it in your survey responses. That's a challenging process. It's a cumbersome process. I'm going to walk through that with you. I know you all have seen it, but we're going to walk through it and talk about some of the challenges there, and then I will show you how this can be a lot simpler and a lot more effective for your organization using MotioCI. Now, some of you have MotioCI or perhaps have heard my presentations before, and there are multiple ways to do deployments in MotioCI. Some of you have focus on like self-service deployment, and we have some options for that. Some are more administrator-driven, where they have administrators create labels and do deployment. What I'm going to show today is a little bit of a hybrid type approach, and you may not have seen it before in terms of a workflow. We're going to allow the authors to specify what changes belong in a release, and then have the administrator go in and punch the button to say, okay, move this release from dev to QA, and you'll see how that works. So first, let's walk through a standard process in Cognos. So I have a Cognos environment here. I'm going to navigate down. I have a folder. I have a bunch of objects in this folder. This is a report. It's a relatively simple report. Let's go ahead and run this report and see what it looks like. And it's a very, very simple report. From the Go Sales examples, it has each product line and the revenue associated with that product line. I have a second Cognos environment. It's going to be my target environment for this demonstration. This could be your QA environment. It could be your production environment. I have the exact same report in this environment. And so currently, they're both in the exact same state. So these two environments are completely synchronized. They've got the exact same packages, the exact same reports, everything is the same. But the scenario that I want you to think about is, okay, we need to change this report. We want to change it in development, and we want to move that change from development to QA, and then ultimately up to production. Let's go ahead and make a change to this report. And one of the things I think we could do is maybe add a title to it, something like that. So let's make a change to this. So I'm going to go into my dev environment. This is the new authoring experience. I'm going to go in and click Edit, and I'm going to put a title here and say Revenue by product line, or whatever I want to put as the title. And go ahead then and save that. And that's easy enough to do. And that change has been made now in dev, but I need to get it to production. One of the things that I face immediately when I start thinking about the standard Cognos tools is I've got this folder here, sales, and I've got a lot of objects in it. Probably some of these are ready to go to production, some are not. Some are maybe partially complete, changes that are in works. I need to know whether or not they are ready for deployment. That's my first challenge. And secondly, I need to be able to pick out and export the individual objects that I want to deploy. You can't really do that very well with Cognos export import. There's no way to really indicate that something's ready for deployment. There's no way to deploy particular objects from a folder. So you're really faced with a challenge and a process that a lot of companies come up with, and it sounds like based on our survey results, a lot of you have come up with, is you create some sort of folder structure. So you have, in my case, I've created a folder called releases, and for every release that we do, I've created a folder. So I've got this release 8 folder, and currently there's nothing in that folder. Let's go ahead and copy. So the kind of process that you put in place and you tell your authors is you say, when this is ready to release, copy it to the releases folder. So let's go ahead and copy this folder, and let's pretend that we're a good report author, and we're going to do as we're told here, and we're going to copy this up into this releases folder. Copy it up. And now I've got a nice copy of my report over here, and I need to export and import that into my new environment. So let me go to the administration console, and for those of you still on Cognos 10, you're going to be excited. This is still the same exact console that you had in Cognos 10, and you walk through the same process to do an export. And one of the things, of course, is that this is not very flexible, and it also just takes a long time. So I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I can. I'm going to create a new export, do release 8.0, and I'm going to step through this process as quickly as I can. I'm going to go ahead and add my releases folder here, get my release 8, get my release 8 folder into the export, and then I'm just going to next my way through these various options. So one thing we talk a lot about is that this is kind of cumbersome and time-consuming, and I think you can see that. The other portion of it is it's just not very flexible. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now. I'd like to see the results. And as you all would know, this is going to produce a zip file with that content on the server. I happen to be an administrator, so I'm going to go into my server and I'm going to move that content from my development server to my target environment. And lucky for me, both of my Cognos environments are on the same server. That's not always the case, so you may have to jump through additional hoops to get your zip file, but I'm going to do a straight copy and go ahead and move that across. If I can get the password right. And so that did move that file across to the new environment. And so then we can go to our new environment. Let's close this one. So this is our target environment, and we can navigate the exact same pathway and do an import. And so let's go ahead and run an import for this very same item, and step through that import process. And sometimes I forget to check that, but we're going to go ahead and check that content and run it if we can get to that. And let's run that now. And we've imported our content. So that is most of our export-import process. We've now moved the object into our target environment, although as the administrator, we're not really finished yet. We have this object that's been imported into this release folder. We now need to copy it up where it belongs. And so if we come and we look at that, one thing that we have to be aware of is that we may be breaking things if we copy over this existing report. If we look at saved outputs, we've got some users that have saved various outputs for this particular report. There might be a schedule associated with that report. And so let's go ahead and add a schedule. Okay, so maybe, all right, well, let me know if there's, maybe there's some level of network lag. I got to going a little fast there trying to get through some of this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and add a schedule for this particular report. And so now we have a schedule for that report. So we have things that reference this report. There are other things that you could create as well, views, shortcuts, drill throughs, but you have to be concerned about the things that reference this particular report. If we go back now and copy this, and we copy it over our existing report, and maybe we just do a move there, and that's all well and fine. Our updated report will get pushed out here, but one of the problems that we see is our outputs are gone. As well, our schedule is gone. There are some ways to work around that. I think it was like 9% of you said that you did a copy to clipboard in like Report Studio and a paste. And part of the reason people do that is to work around these specific problems. But that's very labor intensive for the administrators. They have to then go one by one and copy those reports and paste it. And these are very valuable resources that could be using their time for more productive uses instead of just copying and pasting objects around. So what we want to do in MotioCI is really simplify that deployment process and make it easier to do and make it easier to understand what has happened within your particular environment. So let's go through a very similar scenario, but let's use MotioCI instead. And before I leave this target environment, just so I don't have to come back to it and jump around so much, I've got another report here. It's a pretty simple report, and it's got you pick a particular retail store, you pick a particular year, and you hit finish, and you get a simple report. One improvement we could probably make to this is formatting on this gross profit. That should probably have some level of formatting. So we'll go ahead in our dev environment and make that change. Before we do that, I'd just like to show you that this report has some of the same items. It has a saved output. It has a schedule associated with it. And we can see that here. You can see the schedule for that report. I'm going to go into dev. I'm going to make my change. I'm going to use MotioCI to deploy this. You're going to see how much quicker that is than the export-import, and you're going to see that these items are preserved. These references are not broke. So let's go ahead in our development environment and let's make a change. So let's go ahead and take this very same report and edit it in our development environment. So I can go ahead and check this out using the MotioCI version control, and I can make a change here and actually change maybe the data format to a currency and put the number of decimal places at 0 because these are rather large numbers and we don't care about the cents on them. So now we've formatted this thing, and if we were to run it, we would see that formatting here, and we can go ahead and run that and see that that formatting applied in the development environment. So you see that here. So now that we've got that, we can go ahead and check this back in. So we hit the check-in button, and we can put a comment documenting our change. So we can say formatted gross profit. The thing I want to draw your attention to is the ability to immediately add this to a release. So the person making the changes can say, this change should be part of release 8. And they can actually pick from whichever release they need to add this to and add it to the release 8. And that's it. That's all the author needs to do. So they don't need to go copy this or do any other work. Immediately from the authoring experience, they can say, all right, add this to release 8. Your report author is now finished. They can go on to their next productive task. Whenever it is time for the administrator to actually move this release from dev to QA, they come into MotioCI and they can see the release and they can see everything associated with that release, and they can very, very easily move that forward to the next environment. They simply hit promote and move that forward. They have a couple of options. Of course, they can schedule this if they want to, but we're going to go ahead and run this immediately and move that change forward into the QA environment. If we come into our target environment here, we will see if we run this report, we'll see the change has been applied. Sorry, it's taking just a moment to run. So this is running now, and we should see, we get our prompt values, and then we see that the change did make it, of course, across. And the other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is the fact that all of the references are preserved. If we view those versions, we still see all of them here. If we come in and look at the properties, we still see our schedule. The same would be true for jobs and views and drill throughs and anything else that references this particular report. So there's no extra effort involved in maintaining those, and we can see all of that really easily. We also have the ability to look at this object at any point in time and see the full history of that object and when it was changed, and also look at the deployment history. So you have traceability in terms of being able to see who deployed this, when, from where, to where. All of those things are available to you. So what we try to highlight for our customers is that by using this, they streamline the process and simplify that. It's a lot easier than doing the export and import. It also introduces less problems. You don't have the broken references and stuff. There are a few other scenarios that we sometimes talk about, the ability to automate this via scripting, if you want to do that, or the ability to create labels and move them forward from an admin perspective. We're getting a little bit low on time, so I want to go ahead and close out my presentation here and just see what questions you guys have. So I've got the list of questions here. I'm going to go through those. Let me see if I can find those in the chat. One of the questions, and it looks like a couple people have it, is how are these labels created? And I didn't go through that, but the administrator just creates them beforehand and sets them up, whatever labels, and you can name them however you want. If you want to see those, he just right-clicks on the label folder and says Add Label and creates a label. The second question that we have here says, can packages and other objects be promoted this way? And yes, absolutely. I demonstrated a report because that's a fairly common object, but you can add a package to a label or any other object and move those forward in the exact same way. There's another question here where someone asked who is allowed to do the deployments. And that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. You don't actually have to be an administrator to do the deployments. We do create a set of roles in the Cognos namespace that controls who does the deployments. And you can configure that and say who can do the deployment and who cannot. But it doesn't necessarily have to be an administrator. That is entirely up to you and your organization. And then one more question, and I'm trying to see if there are any more. We may have to get to some of these offline. But one question asked, is the folder structure need to be the same in development and the target environments? And no, we do have an option where you can move it from one folder to another. So if you still want to maintain some of that legacy folder structure, you could do that. With MotioCI, you can probably simplify your processes and move to a similar folder structure, but we do have options to handle that if you need to handle that. Okay. All right. I think we're essentially out of time here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and there are a couple other questions which we will answer offline and make sure you get answers to those questions.
Yes, we got a lot of questions around here. People have multiple environments. How is the product licensed? What is the cost? Can you show rollback? We will go into that, and we'll come back to you and discuss that. What I wanted to do is invite you to the next skill session. The next skill session will be about how you can use Cognos data in Qlik and Tableau. And we see that a lot of customers have spent a lot of money and effort in Cognos, but suddenly have Qlik and Tableau as well. Well, do you want to leverage the investment you made, and how can you load this data that is governed into Qlik and Tableau? So we will do that in September, so that's very good. So I'm going to round up, and I would like you to fill in the survey at the end of this webinar. So thank you all for joining.